Interview 5, Mr. Tory Banks. Excuse me. Go ahead, Tory.
I first seen him when me and my friend was walking around one day. We'd been playing at the park, and we saw a man walking into the field. So Ray said, let's just follow him through the field, and we won't get lost, because his mama and my mama told us that we can't go through the field because it was haunted. She said it was haunted and cursed. So we wouldn't have gone through it, but since there was an older man cutting through the weeds, we thought we'd just follow him through it. We thought it was okay. So he was making a path, like through the weeds, and we were following the path. We wasn't too far behind him, but we didn't know him, so we stayed back a little bit, but we could still see him. We were about halfway across the field, and the man just started sinking into the grass. The grass was taller than both of us. It was like this high. So, of course, it was years ago, and we were a lot shorter then, but we had to push the weeds open like this when we were walking, but he was pretty much making the path. So he just started sinking into the ground like he was getting shorter, you know what I mean? It was like quicksand to him, but the ground was still hard to us. He just kept going down and down until he went all the way under the ground. We kept walking up just a little bit, but when the path stopped, he was nowhere to be found. So we turned around and ran back to the street.
So what did the man look like?
He was like an old black man. He had some overalls on, some boots, and he was humming a song. It was like yeah, I remember it because I couldn't sleep that night. The song kept playing over and over in my head.
Were you scared when you first saw him?
No, he was just like a regular old man. He's just walking along the field and humming that song, just yeah, I won't ever forget that tune.
I was young when I first heard of the man in the field. My grandmother told me about him way back in, I think, 1958 or maybe 1960. I was about 8 years old then. She told me, now listen, don't you go near that field behind the school. Now you walk around that field. She said, there's a man there that lives there, and he will grab you and take you in there, and nobody ever see you again. You know, when you're young, you believe in stuff like that, especially when grown folks tell you. But you eventually grow up and realize there ain't no Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. And I thought there weren't no man in the field, till I found out for myself there was. I attended the school down there from elementary all the way through junior high, and we had recess there about every day when it wasn't raining. Well, the school put up a 6-foot chain link fence long before I went there, so I never knew of a time when there wasn't one. At recess every day, at least one group of children would be right up against the fence talking about the old man in the field. Oh, some of them would say he was an evil spirit. Some would say he got his head cut off and walking around there looking for it. Some say it was downright bullshit. Yeah, old Tim. That boy had a mouth on him before he ever learned the alphabet. All the kids would dare each other to slip under the fence and run to the edge of the field. We bet our lunch money, but nobody would ever do it. Nobody ever took that bet. But one day, when I was in the 5th grade, we was playing softball on the playground, and one of the up-and-coming athletes knocked it over the fence. It bounced a few times and ended up just over the grass line of the field. And we asked the teacher, I don't remember what her name was because I never had any classes with her, just saw her out at recess, you see. We asked her if she would get the ball for us, or let one of the older kids get it. She said, hell no, I'm not getting my head chopped off over no softball. You can go back inside and get another one. Of course, little bad Tim spoke up and said, Miss So-and-so, there ain't no old man in that field. They got to arguing back and forth about who saw what, and so-and-so's son saw the old man and her baby's cousin saw him. Tim was saying that they were probably lying, and so they kept mouthing back and forth to each other about that. Well, while they was arguing, I began walking back to the fence to see exactly where the ball had landed. The ball was sitting about 10 feet inside the fence. Somebody had thrown it back over the fence. I ran over and picked it up, was about to show Tim what I had. The moment I stood up, my eyes fixed right into his. It was him, the old man in the field. His eyes were just as green as a pair of emeralds. He was standing right outside the field. He didn't look mean, but he scared me ice cold. I dropped that ball and screamed. Everybody came running over. Tim saw him, the teacher saw him, and just about everybody on the playground saw him. They started screaming, man in the field, old Green Eyes, the ghost. They called him old Green Eyes. Children were screaming, running back inside. The teachers were the first ones in. I didn't want to be out there alone, so I turned screaming right along with them. When I got back inside, I turned to look back, and he was still there, just staring at me with those green eyes. Then he just slid backwards into the field, and the grass just closed back up like nothing ever happened. I had bad dreams about that for years. It was in the paper. Here, I kept the article. Give me a second, I'll show it to you.
Mrs. Melissa Young then proceeded to flip through the photo album she'd placed on the table before our interview. I wandered over to the kitchen window and looked out at the old school. My eyes fixated on the flaking white paint of the main building, then over towards the playground, then to the rusted chain-link fence, and finally onto the field on the other side of it. The field was not enormous by any means, just a little over 5 acres or so, but not exactly a small lot. From what I could dig up on the last minute's notice, it had once been a small farm with a small shotgun house on the southeast corner. I ran a quick title search earlier that morning at the town hall. It originally belonged to a man named Joseph S. Murray. I found he was a farmer whose name appeared in the books under several of the original farm lots around the city of Cedar Lake, Arkansas. Time and again, the farm lot changed names, except for the 7-acre lot. It was a quitclaim deed passed over to a man by the name of Chester M. Smith. I assume Mr. Smith is the man in the field.
Here it is.
Mrs. Young beamed and handed me the article. The date at the top of the article read November 14th, 1962. The man in the field spotted by dozens of witnesses. On Thursday, November 15th, a local legend, the man in the field was spotted by several students and staff of Ethel Maybridge School during recess. According to staff members and teacher Mrs. Luella Goodman, the strange man returned a lost softball that was struck over the fence by a student. The article went on to say that the man in the field had been a local legend for the past 100 years and was thought to be a myth by some people and pure fact by others. There was no information available on any sort of investigations. I'd first heard of the story during a work meeting in Little Rock. I was passing through Cedar Lake on the way and stopped to get a bite to eat at a small cafe. I overheard an elderly couple talking about it.
"That's old Chester's place. I don't want nothing to do with it."
The couple went on to talk about it. From what I gathered, it was an old abandoned piece of land that was supposedly haunted. Several people have witnessed the ghost of an old man lurking there. Apparently a group of people were interested in buying and developing the land, but one by one they began to back out. The old man I overheard was one of those potential buyers. After talking with them, I got the location of the field and snapped a few photos. I do paranormal investigations as a hobby, and so far I've only explored one abandoned building. It was uneventful, but this was something that piqued my interest. I planned a Saturday to visit and speak with some of the locals about the old man in the field. I would get a few accounts to add to the story, assemble a team, then begin the hunt.
Interview, Joseph A. Lorenz. When I was about 17 years old, we was hanging out, drinking some beers at a friend's house. His parents were out of town, so we was just hanging out there. You know how kids do. We got to talking about old Mr. Chester, and one of the fellas, I didn't know him too well, but I knew him a long time, you know what I mean? I mean, it's a small town, so everybody pretty much knows each other. Maybe not by name, but everybody knows each other. He said he was walking along in the field one day, broad daylight, you know. Not nighttime, nothing scary like that. He said he got tired of walking around the field and just decided to cut through it. He said he took about 3 steps into the grass, and he heard something whispering at him. He said he would stop every few feet and listen, but he wouldn't hear nothing when he stopped. D, shut that dog up. He said he was walking through the weeds. It was late spring, so he said the field was covered in Johnson grass, real tall grass over his head. So he just assumed the grass was rubbing together behind him, but the whispering kept getting louder. He said he could almost make out words. Then he said he started getting these chills, but it was warm out. He said the whispering got so loud that he began to hear the words. He said it was like, over here, this way, over here. He said he stopped and turned around to leave, but the grass behind him closed back up, and he didn't know which way to go. So he said he just started running back in the direction that he came. He said by the time he got back to the edge of the field, the voice was shouting at him. He said he could hear Mr. Chester yelling at him, saying, "Over here! Come here! Hey, boy!" I didn't know the guy too well, but he was dead serious. Bobby was his first name, but I don't even think he lives here anymore. So you believed him? Yeah, I believed him. He was dead serious. And it was one of those times, you know, when you're all drunk and you start talking, start to tell your deepest secrets and stuff like that. Yeah, I believed him.
I gathered enough audio for the documentary and had a great team of eager ghost hunters. We stayed the night in a delightful old hotel, quite cozy. We had breakfast and met in the lobby to discuss the plan and test all of our equipment out.
Okay, here we are in the lobby of the lovely Madison Hotel in the quiet, friendly town of Cedar Lake, Arkansas. Here's the team. Chris Stewart of Hot Springs, Arkansas. Say hi, Chris. Hi. Chris is our sound engineer. Marcus Baker of Lake Village is our cameraman. How you doing there, Mark? Excited. Meredith Stewart with a T, not related to Chris. Hello. Meredith is our special equipment operator. She does all the frequency scanning and handles all the other devices that's beyond my comprehension. And I'm your host, Jonathan Hepburn. No relation to Audrey. Let's go find a ghost.
We parked our van on the edge of the southeast corner, where the old shotgun house would have been. We thought it'd be a good place to start. With a quick systems check and cameras rolling, as well as audio and other strange devices, we proceeded to enter the field.
Today is November 13th, 1987. We are proceeding into a legendary field supposedly haunted by an old man who the town folks call Mr. Chester. Is anyone here? Is there anything you'd like to say?
We continued through the tall brown grass, armed with all the equipment we can carry.
Hello. Is anyone there?
We were just a few feet into the field. A sound stopped us dead in our tracks. It was humming, coming through a device that Meredith called a frequency scanner. The radio went back to its usual static sound shortly afterwards.
Mr. Chester? Mr. Chester? Was that you?
There was a loud scream, and Meredith collapsed into convulsions. We immediately grabbed her and drug her back out of the field. She was shaking and gnashing her teeth. Her eyes were solid white, rolled back into her head. We laid her on her side and placed a camera case under her head. It lasted at least 3 minutes. She never mentioned to us that she was epileptic, but we all knew it was something more than that. She eventually began to breathe normally. She rolled on her back and opened her eyes wide as tears began streaming out of the corners and down to the side of her head. She began to sob, humming that same tune we just heard on the scanner. We had to leave town immediately to get Meredith to a hospital. We were waiting in the lobby, sipping coffee and trying to wrap our heads around what had happened. It happened so fast. We'd barely set foot in the field, you know, Chris, the engineer, said. We sipped coffee and quietly discussed our theories to what happened. We pretty much thought she'd been possessed, but we're also open to the epilepsy theory. After about 2 hours, the doctors informed us that Meredith was okay and that her electrolytes were extremely low, but she was okay for visitors. She was still ghost white when we entered the room. Her eyes were bloodshot and black under the lower lids. No one said it, but she looked awful. "How you feeling, killer?" Chris asked. She smiled slightly, but her smile dropped quickly.
I'll be okay.
At this time, a police officer entered the room. We were all a bit confused, so we backed away and began looking around at who may have done something to involve him. The doctor entered right behind him.
"Do you fellas mind if we have a word with Miss Stewart?"
The doctor asked.
It's okay.
Meredith interjected.
They need to hear this too.
The officer, just as confused as the rest of us, took a seat and looked back and forth at everyone until all eye contact had been made and completed. He then pulled out a notepad and pen and nodded to Meredith to begin. Fighting back tears, and after gaining her composure, which her clenched fists and tightly closed eyes we could tell was no easy task, she began.
In the center of Chester's Field, there's an old cistern with a large round wooden lid. It is buried under grass but not very deep. Inside the cistern, inside it you will find the remains of Mr. Chester Mabel Smith, who was murdered by his ex-lover and her boyfriend in order to gain his inheritance, which was the field itself and the house. He was stabbed 22 times, and his head was smashed with a stone. The weapons are down there also.
We all sat silently, our eyes wide with disbelief as she cried. Finally, after she seemed to gain some sort of normal composure, the officer asked,
"Can you explain exactly how you've come to obtain this information?"
Meredith began sobbing uncontrollably. She simply rolled to her side and whispered,
I'm sorry. No, I can't.